Senator, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's start at the top. Not everyone knows what seclusion in schools means. So what is it?
Seclusion is one of the tools that teachers can use with students who are severely dysregulated and perhaps aggressing toward others. We have some parameters around its use in the state of Minnesota. What it is not a disciplinary tool or a way to control behaviors. It is a tool in the toolbox to use to keep people safe when there's an emergency.
I know that there are a lot of misconceptions around what it is and what it isn't, so being very clear about that is helpful. To that end, the current law was passed in 2023. You have some concerns with it, so take me through what the current law is and what those concerns are.
So what we did in 2023 was ban the use of seclusion up through grade 3. And what we didn't do was provide school districts with an alternative or another tool to fill in the void left by the ban on seclusion. It's also important to remember that seclusion is only appropriate to be used when it's an emergency. And I think it's important to understand what an emergency is. It is defined in statute. It means a situation where immediate intervention is needed to protect a child or other individual from physical injury. So it's not when there's just generally unruly behavior or a student is being disrespectful or sassy. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a student that aggresses toward another person, putting either the student or the other person's safety in danger.
Right, so you're saying that it's meant to protect, not punish, and I think that's a really great distinction to make here. Another piece of this debate is that there are supporters of the law as it is. So, to the best of your ability, can you take me through their arguments?
Absolutely. So people support the ban on the use of seclusion up through grade 3 because we heard a lot of stories of it being used inappropriately, used as a disciplinary tool or to punish or for situations or behaviors that did not constitute emergencies. We've heard horror stories of students who experienced additional trauma from being put into seclusion. And of course, it's not appropriate to be used with a student who will experience more trauma. It's not appropriate to use it as a disciplinary tool. There are other states that have no parameters around the use of seclusion, and I think we see some stories of really horrendous events around students who are secluded in ways that are completely against what we do here in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we put up parameters to ensure that it's not used as discipline, it's not used for punishment, it's not used for other behaviors that don't rise to the level of an emergency. So unfortunately, the students who have been harmed by the inappropriate use of seclusion or the unlawful use of seclusion have really driven the argument to ban it altogether. And my argument has always been, let's look at the misuse of it and address that, not take away the tool altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because, just taking away the tool, as you said, removed necessary resources and tools for educators. But the other side argues that it can be used inappropriately. So, both of those things must be addressed. And to that end, you drafted your own bill looking to adjust the use of seclusion in schools. And you worked with those advocates to get something everyone was comfortable with. It passed in the Senate. It didn't pass in the House. So where do we stand now?
Where we stand is the issue was referred to a working group. And kind of the joke around the Capitol is, if you want an issue to die, put it in a working group. But we worked really hard. We had a great group of people who sat down and really talked about the issue. We heard from educators in the special education space. We heard from advocates in the parental rights and disability law space. We heard from parents on both sides of the issue. We took a lot of testimony and a lot of information to come up with recommendations. It was a difficult vote at the end, coming up to the recommendations that we ultimately included in the report. We also had NAMI was on the working group, a representative from NAMI. And what we came up with is something similar to the law that passed the Senate, but even more restrictive in that where the piece that passed the Senate last session went up through grade 6, this goes up through grade 12. And it tries to kind of narrow the circumstances in which seclusion can be used to ensure that parents and guardians are on board with it, that they understand what it is, that they actually see the room so they can ask questions, that they have interpreter services if they need it, and that any consent to using seclusion is explicit consent rather than implicit. In other words, if I don't hear from you, we'll assume you consent. So putting in a lot of safeguards along the way so that everyone is on board. And then if seclusion is used, there are reporting requirements if it's used more than a couple times in a month. The whole IEP team comes back. So it's meant to ensure that it is not misused, it's not overused, it's not traumatic to the child, and that the entire team is involved in the process of how do we best support this student given their complex needs.
Talk to me a little bit about what makes this topic so complicated or contentious.
From my perspective, this is the only issue that I deal with here at the Capitol that I'm emotionally involved in. I feel strongly about a lot of things, but this one kind of goes straight to the mother's heart in me because my son needed seclusion to get through school. So I come at it from that perspective, and so it's difficult for me to sometimes moderate my emotions when I feel so strongly about this because it involves me directly and it's personal to me and my family. And at the same time, the advocates on the other side of the issue, I think, come from the same place. So when you start to talk about your kids, it can get difficult to keep your emotions in check, especially when you have a child with complex needs like I do, and like a lot of the parents on the working group do.
Speaking to the emotions, you said at the last working group meeting that you remain frustrated but hopeful. What does that mean?
That's kind of how I felt the whole time I've been working on this issue. Frustrated in that sometimes it feels like my family's story is either not heard or discounted, but hopeful because we had really good discussions on the work group, and most of the recommendations in the draft report were arrived at by consensus. So the folks got together and figured out things that they agreed on, and those were included in the report. So I'm hopeful because we're continuing to have this discussion. The special education professionals did a phenomenal job offering their input and demonstrating just how hard they work to ensure that they meet the needs of these students.
You know, you mentioned that working groups are where certain ideas go to die, but you're saying you feel hopeful. So do you think the results from this working group will move this issue forward into this new session and you can get some new traction there, or what's next?
I'm not really sure what's next. I do know that I think there's some really good things in our draft report, really good recommendations. I think there are some useful improvements we can make to the law. The disagreement over whether seclusion should be used in grades 1, 2, and 3 remains. So because that issue remains kind of unresolved, I don't know whether we will be able to do anything during this coming session. I only wish we had the opportunity to have these discussions back in 2023 before we enacted the ban, putting school districts sort of in a space to scramble.
Well, hopefully that they get some more resources soon, and especially with your help and your focus on this topic and keeping it front and center. Senator, thank you for sharing your experience and the work group's finding with us today.
Thanks for having me here.